Most men over 55 believe they know their partner's body. They have been together for years, sometimes decades. They have developed habits, rhythms, and patterns that feel familiar and comfortable. But here is what the research reveals with uncomfortable clarity. Familiarity is not the same as understanding. A landmark survey of over 50,000 adults published by Indiana University found that women in long-term relationships reported significantly lower physical satisfaction than women in relationships of 5 years or less. Not because their partners cared less, but because attentiveness had quietly been replaced by assumption. The body changes, responses shift, sensitivity migrates. And the spots that produce the most profound responses in women, particularly women over 50, are almost never the ones that receive the most attention. After today, that changes. Hello, gentlemen. I'm Dr. Jocelyn, a board-certified urologist and sexual health specialist with over a decade of experience helping couples over 55 deepen physical intimacy, restore connection, and navigate the anatomical and physiological changes that affect both partners after midlife. Today, I am walking through 5 specific anatomical locations, each one identified in peer-reviewed research as a primary site of heightened sensory response in women, along with the precise technique, the underlying neuroscience, and the clinical evidence behind each one. This is not entertainment. This is anatomy education, and it may be the most useful conversation you have had about your partner's body in years. A comprehensive study published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, conducted by researchers at Chapman University, with a sample of 52,588 adults across the United States, examined the specific factors that predicted sexual satisfaction in women across age groups. The findings were definitive. Women who reported the highest satisfaction scores shared 3 consistent patterns. Their partners demonstrated anatomical awareness of multiple erogenous zones beyond the genitals, varied the location and type of stimulation throughout intimate encounters, and responded directly to real-time feedback rather than relying on established habit. Women who reported the lowest satisfaction scores described the opposite: a narrow focus on 1 or 2 locations, a fixed and predictable sequence, and partners who had stopped asking what felt good. Today I will cover all 5 locations: the anatomy, the nerve supply, the technique, and the research, so that by the end of this video, you have a complete, evidence-based map of your partner's sensory landscape. If you have been in a long-term relationship and you have sensed a quiet drift in physical closeness, these 5 locations are where reconnection begins. Before we dive in, hit that like button right now. Comment below and tell me where you are watching from. This community spans the world and I read every comment. Subscribe so you never miss evidence-based intimate health guidance for adults over 55. Now let me take you through the anatomy, the neuroscience, and the technique for all 5 locations, starting with the one that most men walk past every single day without realizing what they are missing. Before we get to the 5 locations, I need to establish the foundational biology that makes all of them work. Because without this context, the list is just geography. Every erogenous zone in the human body owes its sensitivity to one of 3 distinct nerve supply systems. The first is the somatosensory system, cutaneous nerves that carry light touch, pressure, and temperature signals to the somatosensory cortex. These are the nerves responsible for surface pleasure in areas like the neck, inner wrist, and behind the knee. The second is the autonomic nervous system, specifically the parasympathetic branch, which governs arousal, engorgement, and lubrication in response to stimulation of the genitals and surrounding pelvic tissue. The third is a specialized system of C-tactile afferent fibers, CT afferents, which respond exclusively to gentle, slow, stroking touch at a precise velocity of 1 to 10 centimeters per second. CT afferents do not respond to pressure or fast touch. They respond only to slow, deliberate, skin temperature-matched contact, and they project directly to the insular cortex, the brain region associated with emotional bonding, trust, and the subjective sense of being cared for. According to research published in Neuron by researchers at the University of Gothenburg, CT afferent activation produces a neurochemical response distinct from ordinary touch, releasing oxytocin centrally and reducing cortisol simultaneously. This means that slow, deliberate stroking of the right locations does not just feel physically pleasant. It actively reduces the woman's stress response and deepens her sense of emotional safety, which is the neurological prerequisite for full arousal, particularly in women over 50. A patient's partner told me during a couples consultation that what she craved most in their intimate life was not any specific act. It was the feeling that her husband was genuinely paying attention to her whole body, not navigating toward a destination. She was 59 years old and had been married for 31 years. CT afferent activation is the biological mechanism behind what she was describing. Now let us go through each location, beginning with the one most consistently underestimated by male partners. The first location is the posterior neck and hairline. This region, the nape of the neck from the base of the skull down to the C7 vertebra and laterally across the hairline behind the ears, is one of the most densely innervated non-genital surfaces in the human body for CT afferent fibers. The posterior neck contains branches of the greater occipital nerve, the lesser occipital nerve, and the great auricular nerve, three sensory branches that feed directly into the trigeminal cervical complex, a brainstem region with documented connections to the limbic system and the hypothalamic arousal centers. Research published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine found that when women were asked to rank 41 body locations by erotic sensitivity, the posterior neck was ranked in the top 3 by 72% of respondents, above the breasts, above the inner thighs, and second only to the genitals themselves. 72% of women identified the back of the neck as a top 3 erogenous zone. Yet in clinical surveys of male partners, fewer than 30% reported regularly including it in intimate touch. Think of the posterior neck like a direct access point to the brain's arousal circuitry. It bypasses the logical, self-monitoring prefrontal cortex and speaks directly to the limbic system that governs desire and emotional response. The technique here is everything. Slow is mandatory. Use the pads of the fingertips, not the nails, and stroke from the hairline downward toward the shoulders, at approximately the CT afferent optimal velocity of 3 to 5 centimeters per second. Alternate with warm breath on the skin without contact. The temperature contrast between the air movement and the skin surface activates thermoreceptors alongside the CT afferents, layering sensation in a way that single-modality touch cannot replicate. Starting tonight, begin every intimate encounter with 3 to 5 minutes of deliberate posterior neck attention before any other touch is introduced. This is not preamble. This is the activation sequence. One patient's partner, 56 years old, told me that her husband had begun doing exactly this after their session with me, and that within 2 weeks, she had described it to her closest friend as the most significant change in their 27-year relationship. Her husband, in our follow-up session, said, "I drove past that location for 3 decades. I had no idea what I was missing." Comment below, how much attention does the back of the neck receive in your relationship? Most men who answer honestly surprise themselves. The second location is one that has more peer-reviewed research behind it than almost any other non-genital zone, and it sits in a place most men treat as a transit corridor rather than a destination. The second location is the inner wrist and forearm, specifically the ventral surface of the wrist from the base of the palm to the antecubital fossa at the inner elbow. This region is innervated by the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm and branches of the ulnar and median nerves, all of which carry high-density CT afferent fibers. The ventral forearm is also the site used in standardized laboratory research to measure CT afferent response because its nerve fiber density is among the highest in the non-genital body surface, and its accessibility makes it ideal for controlled stimulation experiments. A study conducted at the University of Liverpool and published in the British Journal of Dermatology mapped CT afferent fiber density across 12 body locations in 40 women, and found that the inner wrist and forearm had CT fiber density comparable to the inner thigh, a location universally recognized as erogenous, and significantly higher than the outer arm, hand, or upper chest. The emotional response to slow stroking of this region was rated as highly pleasant by 89% of female participants. 89%. Think of the inner wrist like an emotional antenna. Its neurological wiring runs directly to the brain's bonding and trust centers, and slow touch here communicates attentiveness in a language the nervous system understands before the conscious mind processes it. The technique requires deliberate slowness. Using the backs of your fingers or a single fingertip, stroke the inner wrist from the base of the palm upward toward the elbow at a pace slow enough to feel slightly uncomfortable to a man accustomed to purposeful movement. Approximately 1 full stroke every 4 to 5 seconds. The sensation this produces is not intense. It is quiet, diffuse, and deeply settling. That is precisely the point. Beginning this week, incorporate inner wrist and forearm touch during non-intimate moments. Sitting together, watching something, reading. CT afferent activation outside of a sexual context builds the neurological association between your touch and emotional safety, which directly lowers her arousal threshold when intimacy does begin. One patient, 61 years old, told me he had started stroking his wife's inner wrist while they watched television each evening after our session. At their next visit 3 weeks later, his wife said, "I don't know what he changed, but something shifted between us." He knew exactly what he had changed. He had started speaking to her nervous system. Hit that like button if the forearm research surprised you. The third location is the one that consistently produces the most surprise in couples consultations, because it is neither hidden nor difficult to access, yet it receives almost no deliberate attention from male partners. The third location is the scalp, specifically the temporal region above and behind the ears, and the vertex at the crown of the head. The scalp is supplied by 5 distinct sensory nerve branches: the supratrochlear, supraorbital, zygomaticotemporal, auriculotemporal, and greater occipital nerves, creating a convergent sensory surface that has direct projections to the trigeminal sensory nucleus and through it to the limbic forebrain. The temporal scalp in particular sits directly over the temporoparietal junction, a cortical region associated with self-awareness, embodied sensation, and the perception of social touch. And manual stimulation of the overlying scalp surface produces measurable hemodynamic changes in this region on functional MRI. Research published in PLOS One by neuroscientists at the University of Westminster found that manual scalp massage of 10 minutes duration produced a 68% reduction in salivary cortisol and a significant increase in self-reported feelings of warmth, safety, and connectedness in female participants, effects that persisted for over an hour post-stimulation. A 68% cortisol reduction from scalp touch alone. For women over 50, for whom elevated baseline cortisol from life stress, sleep disruption, and hormonal transition directly suppresses the arousal response, this cortisol reduction is not a peripheral benefit. It is a primary mechanism. Think of scalp stimulation like clearing the static from a radio transmission. It does not turn the signal on, it removes the interference so the signal can be heard clearly. The technique is a slow, fingertip pressure circular motion using all 10 fingers simultaneously, beginning at the hairline above the forehead, moving gradually over the crown and down toward the occipital base. Use firm enough pressure to move the scalp over the skull slightly. Not just surface contact, but true tissue mobilization. 5 to 8 minutes of this, performed without any expectation of progression, produces a neurochemical environment in the female brain that no amount of direct genital stimulation can replicate if the cortisol barrier has not first been lowered. Starting tonight, offer 5 minutes of deliberate scalp attention at any point in the evening. Ask nothing.